Welcome to Gate Crashers, a podcast dedicated to kicking open the door to your next favorite thing. Our mission, our creed, our code is this: to make all things more approachable and accessible to everyone. We want you to find a universe that you'll fall in love with. My name is Jimmy Gaspero. I use he, him pronouns. And my guest today is writer Mike Chen. Mike's previous books include Here and Now and Then, which I hope to talk a little bit about today. A Beginning at the End and We Could Be Heroes. His newest book, Light Years from Home, is set to be published January 25th. Mike, welcome to Gate Crashers.
Thank you so much for having me.
One thing I wanted to ask you, which will come into play later. Mike, do you know what a Rube Goldberg machine is?
I know the term, and I'm totally blanking on it right now.
It's like, think Mousetrap. It's a complicated machine used to do a simple task. So,
okay,
I need to ask you that. It'll come up at the end.
Okay.
But so as we near almost 2 years of going through a global pandemic, how the heck are you holding up?
Yeah, I always tell people, do you want the honest answer or the polite answer? The honest answer is barely, but I think we're all in various states of that these days. I will say that writing has been, it's pressure because I have a day job and my daughter is homeschooling for at least another few weeks, but she's been homeschooling this whole time, which is just terrible. But writing lets me be in my head, which is such a relief because it feels like from like 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. is just constant noise, whether it's like a work meeting or my daughter needs something or, my wife's on the phone with whatever she's doing. So to get to write and disappear into my head for a few hours during this time is like how I'm getting through it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. A coworker of mine, my birthday's in March, and a few weeks ago, a coworker of mine, they said, "So you're looking forward to spending another birthday, your third birthday in a pandemic?" And I haven't spoken to him since. I was so upset. Yeah, it's just, I've been somewhat lucky being able to go into the office, but it's, I hear you. It must be at least somewhat of a reprieve to be able to spend some time with some of the characters that you write.
Yeah, it's nice to, think inwardly rather than outwardly at all of the different demands that are going on right now. So, we had hoped that once our daughter was vaccinated, because my wife has an immune condition, that we would be able to send her back to school in early January, and that clearly didn't happen. But we're trying to remain positive, and I'm still being productive through it, both with day job and writing. So, the writing is a relief during all of this.
Well, that's good to hear. So officially, as we begin now, the first question that we ask on Gate Crashers is, Mike, what is your favorite sandwich?
It depends on the meal. But I would say for lunch, my favorite sandwich is a club sandwich served with a side of curly fries.
That's a good answer. There's nothing wrong with a good club sandwich and some curly fries.
Yeah, especially if you make sure you add in the avocado, which they don't always do.
Oh, yeah. That is a nice touch. All right. So Light Years from Home is what we're here to talk about today. Just quickly, for anyone that's not familiar, the back of the book synopsis, Evie Shao and her sister Cass aren't on speaking terms. 15 years ago on a family camping trip, their father and brother vanished. Their dad turned up days later, dehydrated and confused, and convinced he'd been abducted by aliens. Their brother Jacob remained missing. The women dealt with it very differently. Cass, suspecting her college dropout twin, simply ran off because became the rock of the family. Evie traded academics to pursue alien conspiracy theories, always looking for Jacob. When Evie's UFO network uncovers a new event, she goes to investigate and discovers Jacob is back. He's different, older, stranger, and talking of an intergalactic war, but the tensions between the siblings haven't changed at all. If the family's going to come together to help Jacob, then Cass and Evie are going to have to fix their issues and fast, because the FBI is after Jacob, And if their brother is telling the truth, possibly an entire space armada too. First off, Mike, I want to say I love the book.
Thank you.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It checked a lot of boxes for me. And I want to talk, dive into, about the book, but I actually want to start with the end of the book, not the end of the story, but the acknowledgement section. You mentioned Kat Howard, I believe, is another writer, and Kat Howard suggested you at one point start over. So can you kind of take me through the development process for this book? And when that happens, when you've written something and a friend that you trust takes a look at it and says, hey, there's something here, but you need to maybe go back to the beginning. How do you navigate that? And in particular, how did you navigate that with Light Years from Home?
So I try to have Kat look at everything that I write. I trust her. She's available for freelance editing, and I highly recommend her. That's how I started with her, because when I was on submission for Here and Now and Then, I had a major revision request from an editor while we were on sub, and I wasn't quite sure how to handle it. And my agent suggested Kat, and then we became friends after that. So I trust her with everything. So what I try to do with these projects that sell on proposal, I don't like going into it cold. So what I try to do is I try to write at least a first act, hopefully a first half, but if I have time, but at least a first act. So I know the voices in the world, and I know if there's something wrong. So before I turned this into my editor, I wrote the first act, and I sent it to Kat. And because it's, at that point, it's only like 20,000 words. So it's something that she could turn around within a few days. And the idea is I would rather scrap it and rebuild it at this stage than after like 100,000 words. Like it's just, it's like sunk cost fallacy right there. So in this case, what I was originally trying to do with this, I was trying to be like my friend Pun Shepherd, who her book, the Book of M, has dual timelines that wind up syncing up about 2/3 of the way through the book. And I always thought that's really clever when you can do that. So I started this off as a dual timeline thing with the present day, family coming together, and the past timeline of the what was happening, like a real time view of what was happening before the camping trip and immediately after.
Oh, okay.
And it was all supposed to coalesce with like a moment where they all like look at the device that they wind up talking about. And Kat was like, it's not working because like you're already getting bickering in the present timeline, and then you're just adding more bickering in the past timeline, and it's like it's not moving fast enough. So she suggested that I end Act 1. Originally, Act 1 ended with Jacob coming back to the family home, and now that's moved. That's like halfway through Act 1, and Act 1 ends with them going to like go to the diner and like try to have a conversation for the first time. So she accelerated things, and then she's like, you can't, this past timeline isn't working. You just make them flashbacks. And so I had to restructure how I planned everything. Because if you're going to accelerate the timeline by like 50% in the outline, then you have to fill it in somehow. So I had to, and also if I'm scrapping an entire timeline of plot, then I also have to fill it in somehow. So I had to restructure everything in the proposal, and then also just like rewrite it. But she was totally right. It's way tighter this way.
Yeah, I appreciated the structure of it. Somewhat reminded me of, to compare it to a TV show, the television show Lost, where every episode highlighted a character, and then there was the flashbacks in terms of their backstory. It felt like almost every chapter, which spotlighted a different sibling, you were then kind of getting another little glimpse, a little moment into the past, and it really moved that way too, as well.
And what I was really trying to do too is it's not necessarily each successive chapter, but like in close enough proximity that like when one sibling is thinking about one thing, then pretty soon after you get the perspective of the other sibling, and it's usually to balance out like there needed to be a running question. Like one of the themes going through here is like perspective and memory and belief. And I wanted to really show like how these three people could experience the same thing in different ways, and they're not necessarily wrong. Like, they're not necessarily inaccurate. It's just, their context, their personal context, their personal history, all of that is coloring in what they're taking away from something. And so it was really important to try to, like, from a mechanical plot perspective, like make sure all of that was knitted together really close to each other. So you weren't thinking like, oh wait, well, what happened to Cass, 50 pages ago? It all had to sync together.
Right. No, I mean that makes sense. And then just in terms of thinking about the family and how they were, what you learn about them before Jacob's disappearance, they seem to me to be a family that if an outsider saw them in that time period before he disappeared, they would have come across as like, the perfect family. But as the book goes on, you learn about the issues that they had even before Jacob's disappearance, and you kind of get the siblings' different perspective. So that, and what I wanted to ask was in terms of, as you're talking about how like changing the structure and how it was structured. So then with each chapter being named for a different sibling whose viewpoint we are getting, did you intentionally, after you reworked it, structure the story that way, or did kind of the content you wanted to give dictate that form?
Yeah, I intentionally wanted to rotate it through. So the original form with the dual timelines was that Cass would be the present timeline and Evie would be the past timeline.
Okay.
But that clearly didn't work. So at that point, I just made it Cassie and Evie as the point of views. But as I was breaking it apart, I realized that it was necessary to insert Jacob in there because of otherwise there would just be like these questions of how do I convey like the information that of like what Jacob is thinking and what he's experienced. Like, and there's no way to do that because the sisters aren't sure what to believe, and he can't just stand there and spout out exposition. So his chapters became necessary, but you'll notice that they are shorter. Like typically, one of my usual chapters is like 2,000 to 3,000 words, and I think Jacob's are usually 1,000 to 1,500 words, and there's fewer of them, and so that's intentional because he is the mystery. So right. It's important to, if you're in his head too long, then you kind of give away the mystery about whether or not he's telling the truth. So it was important to keep him in there to provide necessary plot elements and like family history, but not too much. Actually, there is one chapter that got cut at the midpoint because my editor was saying, because I was trying to keep it. I was trying to keep it really regular. So for like every 2 chapters that the sisters got, that Jacob would get 1. And I wanted to like keep it pretty symmetrical in terms of like the rhythm of this. And then Jacob had another short chapter near the midpoint, and then she said like, I see like the rhythm that you're trying to keep up, but there's nothing happening in this chapter. Like we're just in his head for like 750 words. So you can just cut the whole thing. And I tend to like symmetry with my structure. So I was like, no, I can't do that. But she was right. I just cut it.
That's funny. I actually, because the book starts from, Jacob's perspective. And once you get into the chapters, and as you just mentioned, the sisters start questioning his story, I was so into it, I didn't consider it. I think I gasped out loud, and I was like, "Oh, he's unreliable." I was like, I didn't even consider that. I was like, "Oh no, I I didn't leave my lawyer hat on when I was reading the book. I was hook, line, and sinker.
No, it was really important to like, start off like we talked about the different ways to start this book, and from the beginning I was talking with my editor. I thought the strongest way to do it was to put the space opera bit in right away, and then like basically never return to it except like peripherally, because because Jacob's story is just so bonkers, like what he tells his sisters, that unless you can experience it like firsthand in the opening chapter, it's going to sound insane. So I wanted to ground the reader in there so you see what he's experiencing, and then when the sisters start to like poke holes in it, then you can really start to question it. But I wanted there to be like complete confidence, and then like the holes start to poke in, and then the second half of the book is about like, is it true or is it not true?
Right. And then how does the family deal with it one way or the other? How do they, it got me. So it worked on me, Mike.
It's funny. I realized one of the issues with starting that way is that if someone is picking up this book cold, which, hopefully they're not, but if they're picking it up totally cold, that sets the expectations for, like a Mass Effect style adventure, which this book clearly is not. Like I saw some of my friends and I, like, we spring each other's Goodreads reviews because we were like releasing around the same time. And she told me that like the only negative thing is like the people who are like, I thought this was a space opera book because it opens with space opera and it's just like a family arguing the whole time. And I'm like, I can't knock that. That is totally true. But like all of the, promotional copy says that. So.
Right. Wow, that's funny. But so to talk about some of the, I guess, the space opera or the alien aspect of it too, I guess in a sense to acknowledge the X-Files of it all.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the X-Files premiered in 1993. I was 14 years old, and I was instantly hooked on that show. While other friends, I think we're probably talking about the 93 Phillies because they played in the World Series against the Toronto Blue Jays. I was at the library researching books about Project Blue Book and the Majestic 12.
Nice.
So it'll tell you a little bit about my childhood. So I know in your book, Lake Kinboat is a reference to the X-Files episode, one of the better ones, one of the great ones, Jose Chung's From Outer Space, which actually in itself, I learned researching for this interview, is a reference to a character in Vladimir Nabokov's Pale Fire. So didn't know that before.
Know that.
So I'm assuming you were a fan of the X-Files, or at least somewhat from some of the references in the book.
So not from like 93 to 97. I was like peripheral, and TV was different back then with like how you had to catch it and stuff. So
sure.
So I wasn't really into it for the first few seasons, but in the mid to late 90s, my neighbor in college really got me into it. Not on an obsessive level, but because I've always been a science fiction fan, like I definitely appreciated what was going on there. And I met my wife in 2002, and she was a mega fan. Like she went to, before cons were, these huge cash cows, like she went to like the Bay Area X-Files convention in like 1998, and it was in like a warehouse. and like she met the composer Mark Snow there, and I forgot who she said this to. I think it was one of the Lone Gunmen, where they asked her like, how are you doing? And then she just said like, I am having a really good time, because she didn't know what else to say. So she is a mega fan.
All right.
Like he has Mulder and Scully Barbies somewhere in like one of our storage boxes. So we've rewatched the series together a few times. When I remember one of the few times, like you get to know like what makes your spouse really, really mad. And I remember the premiere of the reboot or like, the sequel seasons was taking place. It was right after the Super Bowl. My wife does not give a crap about any sports at all. But the Super Bowl was running long. And she was so mad at these stupid football players delaying her X-Files. And then like the DVR messed it up because like the schedule was wrong, and like I had not seen her that mad in I don't know how long, like just like screaming about like how we have to miss the new X-Files and what the hell was wrong with the world and all this
Oh
stuff.
my gosh.
So yeah, but like we're fans. We're definitely fans.
Okay. Similarly, I mean, the early 90s, and in part, maybe X-Files led it or as a result, but there seemed to be, a UFO alien craze to, a certain extent, which seems to be coming back somewhat. I mean, with the government recently revealing footage that of UFOs, I guess they're called UAPs now,
Mm-hmm.
that they can't identify. And I was saying it's crazy to me to think that it's in large part due to the efforts of Blink 182's Tom DeLonge and his group's Freedom of Information Act requests.
Multiple career paths.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of Evie, who is the one that after Jacob disappears, she kind of takes on this quest to figure out what happened to her brother. Did you have to do research into current UFO researchers and the type of things they do and like actual groups that are out there to inform her character?
A little, but not directly. So when I was young in like the early 90s, and I think this was even before the X-Files, like maybe for a few years, but on Fox there was a show called Sightings. And I still remember it was hosted by a dude named Tim White, who I looked up just out of curiosity because I think he's like a weather broadcaster now. He was like, basic newsman presenting stories, but Sightings was like, Bigfoot, UFOs,
Okay.
ghosts, that sort of thing. And then like they would go around and interview the people involved with the stories. It was very much like in the 80s, they had those Time Life books that they would sell on like TV, where it'd be like, what do we know about ghosts and things like that. I loved that stuff. I always loved like the idea of like fantastical and like from a science fiction perspective, but also from like curiosity of the world perspective. So but I never, I have a friend who works, my friend's relative who I've like met at parties over and over, like he works for SETI.
Okay.
And he actually says that like all the stuff that people say is like it's not what we do, like it's completely different. But he was also like he also is super into like ghost hunting, like going to like abandoned places with all this equipment. He's like, I've never seen anything, but it's fun. But that sort of idea, the idea of like the type of equipment like the ghost hunters use, like thermal detection, like audio detection, like different times of like detectable heat or magnetism or whatever. That's really where I started to look at. So not so much what current UFO people are into, but more like on the ghost hunter level, because
Okay.
just because like talking with my friend's relative, and then also like it's more prominent in pop culture. So I looked at like, okay, they're trying to apply like these scientific tools that I'm relatively aware of from the labs I took in college, like in my engineering degree. And then I thought like on a UFO perspective, like what would be the easiest way to detect this? And I figured it has to all be atmospheric, because you're having a vehicle like break into the atmosphere with like an energy level that like we're not used to. Like it's not propulsion, combustion engines. So then I looked at what kind of charts and data are actually publicly available from like weather services and stuff, and then I built up a fake science around that. So the data that Evie pulls on like magnetic declination and atmospheric pressure for the date that Jacob disappears, it's like actually like the historic of like the Lake Tahoe area,
Oh,
like
that's
because
pretty
it's
neat.
like it's all there. Yeah, that's just like my little sciencey Easter egg for myself.
Nice. Oh, that's great. So when I was going through it, I found myself thinking a lot about the father of the family, or Arthur Shao. Maybe it's just I'm a dad myself, and that's the characters I always think of. Like, how's the dad react? and how he responded to Jacob's disappearance in particular, it led me almost directly to thinking about Kin Stewart, who is another father character from your book, Here and Now and Then. Another father on a mission. And do you put pieces of yourself when you write into your characters, and as a father yourself? Are there pieces of you that you see in Arthur Shao?
Yeah, that's funny, because like I don't really think about him. I'm just like so focused on the siblings that and he gets so little screen time except for a few flashbacks that like I've never really considered that. I don't. I had to reread this book for the first time because I turned it in like April, and like I haven't thought about it, and like with multiple deadlines and pandemic stress, like there are entire subplots of this that I had completely forgotten. And so I revisited it just to prepare to talk to press and podcasts and things like that about it.
Sure.
And with that level of distance, like I do see unintentional, like both influence from like the stress of the last few years, and also like family relations. It's like it's buried in there. It's like it's kind of like obscured, but I can definitely see it that like these are either conflicts for people that I knew, or conflicts like between myself and like different relatives, and it's like moved laterally, or it's dressed up or something like that, and it was not intentional at all. Or it's like stress of like how my wife and I are surviving through the pandemic and like isolation and all that stuff. So
Right.
it's even when you don't try, that stuff just comes through. I think that's the one thing that I found with this. But like this writing it, like I was definitely in the point of views of the siblings, and like I didn't even think about the parents at all, other than like secondary characters.
Okay. There were just a couple of things that when you hear the siblings talk about their father, I mean, I don't know you. I've read your books and I follow you on Twitter, but so just there were a couple of things, and it sparked a curiosity that I wanted to ask. But yeah, I mean, because they don't get a lot of screen time, either parent really, but they're so really central in a way to the relationship of the siblings and of this family. So it's just interesting.
The idea was to like create basically like a nuclear bomb in the family history that like none of them can escape. And even after they resolve things, like they still can't escape it. And I thought that was the most interesting thing to see it to play out, because I think we all, as families, like we all have that type of moment, like on different scales and in different contexts. And sometimes people talk about it, and sometimes people don't. But that was a lot of the thinking behind this.
Okay, I mean that kind of leads into what I was gonna ask next in terms of you said it, like you're saying you set aside the alien Jacob's disappearance aspect of it. I mean, it's a heartbreaking story of a family in crisis, dealing with trauma, dealing with each other, trying to figure out how to relate to each other. What inspired you then to tell like this particular story about this family right now?
So there's multiple layers in how and like the inspiration. So I'm always like, some people can pull ideas out of thin air and they just sit down and they write, and I'm not that. I usually it's some form of media sparks a question in my head, and then I run with it. This particular story had several like jumping off points. The original was there's a song called Red, which I nodded to in the book, like Evie's UFO Hunter, like the YouTube network that they're on is called the Red Network. It's by a band called Belly. And the original idea of the song is there's a boy who is so distraught that he wishes that aliens would come and take him away, and then they actually do. And I remember when the so the songwriter is this woman named Tanya Donnelly, and I remember her doing press for that album, and she told that she stated what that was, and like that always stuck with me about like, because it's not what you usually think about with alien abduction. You usually think of it as like this horrific thing, and she had reframed it in like in like an escape type of thing. So I wrote a short story about that, and it wasn't very good. Like I never tried this. I didn't submit it to any magazines or anything, but it stuck with me. And like I still have it in my archive. And then when I saw the Netflix, the Hill House series, The Haunting of Hill House. So I love the original book, but like the series itself was like, it's really what I want out of like every series, because like the character work in that was so strong, even though it totally leaned into the genre conventions of it. And also like the past, present, like generational trauma timelines. I really, really love that. And I remember when we watched that finale, I felt like I want to write something like this. And then it seemed, as I started to think about it, it seemed natural to think about like the short story that I had written about Red, like that would work into this. But then as I started to piece it together, it was like, oh, this is like an X-Files episode without Mulder and Scully. This is like the families that they're investigating getting a full, 2-hour movie about like what happens to them. So that's like, it kind of came together all from that. So there was like the song that inspired the short story, and then there was the Hill House thing that kind of set the structure and like the goal for it, and then like you just blanket X-Files all over it.
Oh wow, that's fascinating to me, like how it all kind of comes together. I read somewhere about, you mentioned the song Red by Belly, and I listened to it yesterday, and I mean I've tangentially aware of Belly, but I can't say that I'm like a fan. Not that I didn't like the music, it just wasn't anything that came into my orbit.
Yeah, they're kind of
But
a cult band. I mean, and they're that album's from '95, so
right, yes. But I listened to Red and yesterday, and like from the opening line, which I think was like, "Red, you look tired. You look older than your mother." I was like, "That's a good line. That's a good lyric."
Tanya Donnelly is, God, her lyrics are just so good.
So if we can talk about some of the other like inspiration in terms of like some of the names which are mentioned from the first chapter, in terms of when you get everything from Jacob's perspective, he's talking about a group called the Awakened and the Seven Bells Fleet. And I also wanted to ask, there's mention of technology that could be alien, could not be. It's you'll have to read to find out. But did you base that on anything in terms of where did that come from? The idea of how that tech worked, was that something you made up whole cloth? Or I mean, I think your background in aerospace engineering with did you use that at all in terms of thinking up the technology for this?
A little bit. It's like what I tell people, like with my engineering degree, I feel like when I was actually working in aerospace, like I work in marketing now, but when I was actually working in aerospace, I found that like I used way less of like the actual math and more of like the actual like thought process and like questioning of like, how do we do this better? How do we take it apart and how do we rebuild it? Like that sort of thing. And I feel like I apply that to writing and storytelling. Because I look at it from a very almost like numbers perspective of like making sure everything's balanced out. But in terms of like the world building for this, so I wasn't quite sure where to start. I'm always intimidated by world building. Like I really, really appreciate it when I see it or read it, but like I feel it's very hard for me to generate on my own. And so I asked the smartest person I know, who was writer Annalee Newitz, and Annalee writes both science fiction and like science nonfiction. And I asked Annalee if there were actually alien civilizations and technology, like what would they be like? And their point was that it would involve whatever the aliens like native environment would be. So like the heat, like the gaseous versus like liquid versus like I guess like terrestrial like land that they live on. Like it would be like, how are they evolutionarily adapting to all that? And I also asked, like, we always see in sci-fi, everything looks like industrial metal, like everything looks like it was like, every spaceship looks like a warehouse. And I'm like, that's probably not true, is it? And they said, no, it would be like whatever they could mine for resources, like whatever they could mine and manufacture. Like that's what, everything comes back to like the environment you're in and the resources it provides. So the Awakened, a lot of their stuff is like this mineral material, and that was me just taking that idea of like, it's going to be like whatever resource they can adapt to. And so it was like, I just wanted to get away from like the metal that you see in every alien species ever. Like I didn't want it to look like a Star Trek set. I wanted to be like something different from that. But in the end, like the aliens that you actually see from Jacob's perspective, like I tried to make them originally as like, oh, they should be really based in science, and then I'm like, I can't come up with this. So they're just Easter eggs of some of my favorite characters. so who you are seeing in there, and readers, if they are fans of these things, read the descriptions. You'll see that it's them. It's Garrus Vakarian from Mass Effect. It's Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars, and it's Captain Saru from Star Trek Discovery, and like they are just there. And that's just my own little bit of fun. But the naming convention. So this is another fandom that I'm in. Almost all of the names in there are Easter eggs for Assassin's Creed. So
okay.
Jacob and Evie are Jacob and Evie Fry from Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Cass is Cassandra from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. This is something I do because I feel I have such a hard time naming things and people. And so I take something that I'm a fan of, and I just Easter egg it. And for me, it makes things way easier because I have a complete list to work with, and then I can like balance like the pronunciation. Like you don't want people with too many similar names, in major roles in your book. So this gives me a list to work with and lets me select it from like a balanced perspective. But so the Awakened was me. I got that from the Assassin's Creed wiki. I was just like poking around like different names, and it's the name of a cult group in there. And I thought, oh, that's really that fit for the idea of like an alien species that's basically like waiting around for civilizations to awaken, and in terms of like their technology, and then they could like usurp them. So I thought it was just a cool name that worked with the theme. And then Seven Bells is based on a real electronic band from the early 2000s called School of Seven Bells, who I really love. But their name was inspired by a secret pickpocket group in South America called the School of Seven Bells.
What?
Yeah. So the idea,
like, wild.
I think like I don't even know if they actually know if this exists, because I just remember seeing this in interviews with them. But the idea of the School of Seven Bells is like they teach you to like put a little bell inside like someone's jacket pocket, and then you have to like steal it back. And if you do it like 7 times, then like you're part of like this thieves guild. Because if you're putting a bell in someone's pocket, then they'll hear it. So if you're so sly that like you can do that, you can pickpocket anything. That was like the basic idea behind it. And I remember when I read that, I always thought like, oh, that's kind of like modern day like Assassin's Creed, and so that's basically how it fits.
There you go.
And it sounds cool. So that's basically it. Yeah.
Yeah, it does sound cool.
Yeah. I think with any and all world building, because it's always peripheral to my stories, the main thing is that the details and the logic have to be consistent. So because you just don't want to break consistency and take the reader out of the story. So even though some of the stuff that I've chosen in there, like putting Garrus in my book, it's still consistent with the internal logic of the story, and that's the most important thing.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. That's so funny. So I guess kind of like the big a big overarching question about this, and what was the most challenging aspect of writing this, of writing Light Years from Home?
I would say I was always worried about the tone of it, because it does balance like the space opera stuff with like the very up close family drama. So I was worried about like the tone and the pacing of it, like, and even leading up to release, like I was really worried because my last book, We Could Be Heroes, is very much more of like a rollicking, like goofy and fun superhero adventure, and this one is very, very grounded. um so I worried about like getting that right, making sure the tension was right to keep what's essentially a contemporary story with some science fiction elements in it. Keep the characters interesting and the conflict tight enough to make sure that the reader stays engaged. And that led to like the decision of like how much space opera stuff am I actually going to show. And I always went back to X-Files for that. And you think about like how the best episodes, they really don't show too much of the fantastical stuff. And like when the X-Files tries to show too much, it often gets really just muddled, and like the pacing kind of goes away, and it takes away some of the mystery. And the fun of that series really is like how people are engaging with these things that are off screen. So I really tried to like keep going back to that, and think about the idea that like this is an X-Files episode without Mulder and Scully.
Right.
And so I think I hit that because of like the reader feedback is really good, except for the people who wanted a full Mass Effect adventure, which I totally
Right.
understand. It's like, it's okay, you guys, please go read John Scalzi instead of me. Like that's totally fine.
No, I think the tone, I think it works, and I think it works well. And I think it's, you talk about the X-Files, you picked the right reference point as well with Lake Kinboat and Lord Kinboat from Jose Chung's From Outer Space, which is an episode from the third season written by Darren Morgan. I think one of their better episodes, because it's bonkers, which is great. But when you dig into the episode, it's a lot about perspective and who's telling the truth, and these characters all going through various events that you really don't know. There's an aspect of it you don't know, like who's telling the truth, what really happened that night. And it's not necessarily that it's revealed at the end in terms of with the X-Files episode. So there is still that mystery aspect to it as to what's really going on. And in terms of your book and the characters trying to deal with what has happened, now that Jacob is back, and where was he? I think that the tone really works for it. So I think you did what you set out to accomplish.
Oh, that's great. I really appreciate that. I think every author that I know, it doesn't matter if it's like their first book or their 10th book, we're always super nervous. Like we're recording this one week before release, and you just don't know, how people are going to take it. So, your response is what I wanted to hear. So that's good.
Yeah, I encourage everyone who's listening, if you haven't, go and pick up Light Years from Home. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And like I said, I was all in from the beginning. And I understand what you're saying about people who might expect like a full-on space opera, but I felt the family dynamic was fascinating. And especially, sometimes it's easier to get into a book when you feel like there's a character that there's some semblance of you. I mean, I feel like I don't know anybody really like Jacob and Cass and Evie, and I was fascinated by how they all worked together and that interplay and how they related to one another. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, that's really great to hear. Thank you.
But before I let you go, I wanted to just talk about Here and Now and Then, if we could.
Sure. Yeah.
Here and Now and Then, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, go get it. I recommend it to everybody. it tells the story of Ken Stewart. He works for a time travel agency, gets stuck in the past. In the past, he gets married. He has a kid. He is eventually found and taken to his own time. But he desperately tries to reconnect with his daughter. So I mean, I don't know if it's helpful to say it's X meets this, but it's like a bit of Time Cop meets Frequency, but it's better than both.
And there is a Time Cop reference in it.
There is. And I actually have, I think I got a signed copy from a Twitter giveaway you did, Mike.
Yeah,
so thank you for that.
I when I saw that you were the host of this, and then I'm like, oh, I remember him.
Yeah, I'm a real sucker for time travel stories. I don't know if it was Back to the Future that started me on that road, but I wanted to ask you, what was your experience like writing, your debut novel? What specifically influenced Here and Now and Then?
So that was completely different, just because the context of my life was very different. So that was originally drafted in 2013, and it went through so many iterations and revisions, and I didn't sign with my agent until 2015. And then that didn't sell until 2017 because there was the market was a little different then. Like you see now, that's a much better acceptance of these character-driven speculative stories. But back then, like it was just kind of like on the cusp of that. Okay. So there was a lot of time for that particular book to cook and revise, and Kat Howard, who I mentioned before, like she helped out with that. So it was, the way that I have to work now is just on these deadlines, and I work with outlines, and I write fast and I sprint. And that was just that's what happens after you sign a contract, and it's just something that you have to adapt to. The story was specifically influenced by Star Trek: The Next Generation's The Inner Lights and Doctor Who's episode School Reunion. And I had, for some reason, BBC America shows a lot of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is like not a BBC thing at all, but they show it and a lot. And I had actually seen them, like they ran those two episodes back to back, just like coincidentally one day. And then like, because they're very thematically similar in how they examine like time and missing time on relationships, it sparked an idea in my head. And then I thought about, with that, like what is like the most extreme relationship that you could separate through something like that? And it would probably be parent-child, because you want to see, as a parent, you want to see your child grow up, and as a child, like you rely on your parents. So that's really where like that whole idea came from.
Oh yeah, I mean, I totally get it. I think that was, I mean, it really is. I don't think I read it till, so my oldest is 9 now, so she was born in 2012. Yeah, so I was already a dad when I read it. And I mean, I thought it was just, I loved it. I mean, I tell everyone, if you're going to get, like, what are you reading? I'm like, don't worry about what I'm reading right now. If you haven't read Here and Now and Then, go get it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And that's, just the aspect of that relationship. And it's heartbreaking to think like he's pulled back, he's pulled back to the future and having to try and navigate that. Also, I will say, as the other number one show I watched, 13 or 12, 13 was Star Trek: The Next Generation. The Inner Light is my favorite episode. So that's a great touchstone for me, in terms of if that being an influence, because I just don't think there's anything better than Patrick Stewart in that performance, mm-hmm. and in particular in that episode. And it's a lot about connection and memory, and it's very well done. All right, well, thank you for that. Speaking of Star Trek: Next Generation, though, I just wanted to touch on, you wrote, I think, an essay in
mm-hmm.
I think I first saw it in 2020, but it was about Jean-Luc Picard, Starfleet's Hope Punk captain, which I think if you Google it, you can still find it. And it's like, especially for right now, it's something I return to. One, because Star Trek The Next Generation is kind of like a comfort thing for me, but also because there was a period of time where I couldn't watch anything dark and gritty, even if
I'm
everyone
still
told
there.
me this was great. Like, look, the Walking Dead in terms of the comic and the TV show, or Game of Thrones, and other shows, they're wonderful and people love them, and I did too, and still do to a certain extent. But I got to a point in time where I'm like, guys, can I just get like a happy ending, something nice happening? Just give me a reason to hope for the future. And like that essay is wonderful. And reminded me of all those. Yeah, that's why I like that stuff. That's why I like science fiction. The idea that people are going out there and they're trying their best to make something nice happen. I just really appreciated that, and everyone should go and Google that and check it out.
Yeah, it's still up on StarTrek.com. Yeah, and
okay.
I would say my wife and I have survived the pandemic just watching almost nothing but Star Trek. like everyone was saying like, oh, you got to watch Succession, and we watched like most of the first season, and it was like, this is acted really well, this is written really well, but every character in here is terrible. This family is terrible. It's just about a bunch of like terrible rich people making terrible decisions. And so it was like, I appreciated everything that went in it, and some of it was just really, really funny. But in the end, I'm like, I don't want to hang out with terrible people right now. The world is terrible enough. Like, I'll return to this when I feel better about things. But like, let's pick a random Voyager episode again.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I agree. So I guess what's next, Mike? I know that I've seen. I think May comes out. Brotherhood. You are writing from Star Trek to Star Wars. You're writing a Star Wars novel, which is about Anakin and Obi-Wan.
Yeah, it's bonkers because I am such a big Clone Wars and prequel era fan. Like, it is my favorite period of Star Wars. So when I signed with my agent in 2015, he asked, like, what are your pie in the sky like dream projects? And I said, I really want to write for Star Wars.
I want to write a Star War.
Yeah, exactly. And so he knows, like, he's known like the editorial team over at Del Rey for a while. And so and I'm very lucky that some of the writers on the Star Wars roster like talked me up to the editorial team too. And so when I got an offer to write for the From a Certain Point of View anthology for the Empire Strikes Back 40th anniversary, like, those are kind of like almost like auditions to see like if you write, if they'll take you to write a full novel.
Oh, okay.
And when I saw like the characters that I could pick from for that anthology, a lot of that anthology is like the wait staff in Cloud City, when Vader is there, or like the general behind Vader, like on the Star Destroyer, like, because it's supposed to retell the story from a certain point of view of side characters or background characters. But I saw Palpatine was on the list too, and it's because they considered him just like basically a cameo in that movie. And I thought,
okay.
like,
yeah, an Empire.
Sure. Yeah, I thought, like, well, why hasn't anyone picked Palpatine yet? And I actually asked the editor that, and he said, oh, I think people are kind of intimidated to do Palpatine. And I thought, like, well, if I may only get one chance to write Star Wars, so I'm gonna go big or go home.
Right.
And so I picked Palpatine, and I wrote this pitch about the moment that Palpatine discovers the identity of Luke Skywalker and how he's connected to Vader / Anakin. And I really leaned into like the connections to Clone Wars and Anakin Skywalker, and like the the heart of Anakin Skywalker. And it was basically like my audition piece of like, let me write an Anakin Skywalker novel. So when they called with this, my agent called me and he said, like, do you want to write a Star Wars novel? And I was like, no way. And he's like, it's about Anakin and Obi-Wan. And I was like, my daughter was doing remote kindergarten at this time. And I'm like, I was supposed to be helping her, but like I clearly did not. And then and so I started asking my agent questions of like, what time period is in, and things like that. And my wife comes downstairs and she hears me say like, is it during the Clone Wars? And then she looks at me and I said like, it's Eric. And Eric is my agent. And she said, do it. So we just made a decision right there that like this was so important that like regardless of what happened with the pandemic, we would find a way to do it. So Star Wars Brotherhood, which calls back to the famous line in Revenge of the Sith, "You were my brother, Anakin." It takes place shortly after Attack of the Clones. Anakin has been elevated to Jedi Knight, so him and Obi-Wan are on equal footing now, and they're not quite sure how to navigate that relationship. And it takes place, it's a bridge between Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars series.
Okay.
I can't say too much about the plot right now other than what's on the back cover copy, but there is... So in Revenge of the Sith, they reference that business on Cato Nemoidia, and so this book is that business on Cato Nemoidia. And you'll see there's been a disaster on Cato Nemoidia. It has potential terrible implications for the war, and so Obi-Wan is sent over to deal with that, and Anakin has to kind of focus on being himself. In this like new world of, he's secretly married and he's a Jedi Knight and he's not quite sure where he fits in without Obi-Wan, and was really, really great to get into their characters and look at like, some of the things that we gently mock about Star Wars is the dialogue, but then like grounding that in like a real world perspective of like, why would someone say I don't like sand?
Right.
Things like that, and really turning it into a piece of their character. So it was a huge gift to be able to like write that and basically think through those characters for a few months. So that comes out in May. I just turned in what I hope will be the final revision. And then we're off to copy edits, and then everything ramps up in a few months.
Wow. Exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah. It's like, I wish I could say more, but I can't right now. I will in like 6 months.
All right. Well, maybe we'll be able to have you back to talk, because if you've looked at anything for Gatecrashers podcast, Star Wars is all over it. In fact, I think Dan and Mike and Ethan and Jake and some of the other individuals that are involved, they did a whole 4-part audio drama called Wild Space that came out that they did on the podcast. So
for any Clone Wars fans out there, Asajj Ventress is in this, and she is so much fun to write because she's just a dick to everyone. So
that's great.
Yeah, she has a significant presence in this.
All right, that's exciting. Not that that's not enough, but anything else that you can working on anything else?
So I have 2 more books on contract with HarperCollins. The next one is called Vampire Weekend, which I am hoping to turn in the first draft at the end of this week. That's my internal goal. And then I'm going to breathe for a few weeks.
Okay.
And Vampire Weekend. So I grew up as a moody teen goth, and a first generation like child of immigrants who weren't quite sure what to make of American pop culture, and like punk rock and goth stuff and vampire stuff was like my way of rebelling. So this really encapsulates a lot of like those feelings from that time. Like when my agent, I had noticed that a few vampire books had sold, and I messaged my agent right away and I said, "Are vampire books back? Can I pitch you a vampire book?" And he said, "Yeah, I think they'll be around for a few years." And so I told him, like, well, I don't want to miss this window. And in 2 weeks, I got him a full proposal because I was so excited about this. So Vampire Weekend is about a woman named Louise who gets turned into a vampire at an Iggy Pop show in the 1970s, like at the height of punk. And she uses her immortality to play in bands and go to shows and basically never resolve the generational damage that she experienced growing up as the child of new immigrants who immigrated in like the 1950s, and the culture clash that kind of was passed down to her as a Chinese child, until the modern day when a long lost relative shows up on her doorstep, asking her, "Can you teach me guitar? And also, can you save my mom from dying by turning her into a vampire?"
Oh,
and
wow.
It's outside of like the sci-fi stuff. It's like everything that I grew up with. It's the cultural stuff, the generational stuff, the love of music, the importance of music, and how music can carry you through really tough times, and like the vampire stuff, which it's very self-aware of like Anne Rice and vampire lore and stuff.
Okay.
In there, and I try to ground it in the real world. Like, so like, it's funny because I have friends who are writing vampire books, and it's just like, they are having so much fun with like the sexual element of vampires. And then I was thinking, well, from a real world, like, why would vampires have sex? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. So like the way I constructed my vampires is that it's basically a viral disease that's transferred in blood, and it controls your metabolism and your immune system so that you're basically living forever. But the exchange for that is that it shuts down all of your non-essential organs. So like eating and sex and things like that, like they're no longer important at all. You're just basically kind of stuck living forever. And I think there's a lot of fun metaphors to play with that. And there's one of the characters even tells Louise, like, your life sounds really depressing. And it can be if that's what you make of it. So we'll see what my editor says. She could hate it and totally rip it apart, but hopefully not. So Kat Howard did give it. She did give it a thumbs up when I sent her like the first 2/3. So hopefully that one comes out it's scheduled for next January, unless there's like a disaster and I have to rewrite the whole thing.
Okay.
And
well, hopefully that won't be the case.
Yeah, there's another book on contract after that, and I don't know what that's going to be yet. I have to figure it out.
Well, I mean, let's see. You've tackled time travel, a pandemic.
Yeah.
If anyone doesn't know, a beginning at the end, which I went on a run in late 2019 where I think I read Emily St. Mandel's Station 11, then Chuck Wendig's Wanderers. Next up, Mike Chen's Beginning at the End. Then came March 2020. It's a real mistake for my mental health.
Yeah. That book came out in January 2020, and promoting it as things got progressively worse was a very strange experience.
Right. And then you did superheroes with We Could Be Heroes, and alien abduction maybe with Light Years from Home. So, all right. Wow. I mean, I think that's everything. And unless there's something else, I just want to say, Mike, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you being here. The final question we have at Gatecrashers is, if you had a Rube Goldberg machine, what would it do?
So this is a really complicated machine that solves a problem.
Yes, that handles a simple task.
I would have something that I would create something that always keeps my coffee warm.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Even though like you don't need a Rube Goldberg machine because they have like these USB hot plates that you can plug into your computer and just put your coffee mug on them. But yeah, I would want something that like keeps my coffee at like the perfect, slightly below burning temperature.
That's perfect. I love it. All right, Mike, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you, and good luck with promoting Light Years from Home, and hopefully maybe we'll be able to talk to you again around when Brotherhood comes out.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for reading. Thank you for reading everything. I really appreciate that.
It's the